The fluorescent lights of Cole Home and Interiors hummed with the particular brightness reserved for showrooms, designed to make ordinary people feel slightly poor. Daniel Reyes stood near the entrance, a folded piece of paper in his jacket pocket containing a budget he had written and rewritten 4 times the night before, long after his daughter had fallen asleep on the couch with her homework still spread across her lap. He was not dressed for this place. He knew that. His jeans were faded from work, not fashion, and his boots still carried the pale dust of a construction site he had left only an hour earlier. But he had promised Mia a real bed for her 9th birthday, not the second-hand frame with the wobbling leg that had been held together with a folded napkin for the better part of a year. He had $840 saved, counted twice, and a number in his head he would not cross no matter how persuasive the smile in front of him became. That smile belonged to Preston Cole, the store's top-performing salesman, a man whose tailored blazer fit with the precision of someone who had never once bought a shirt off a clearance rack. Preston approached with the practiced warmth of someone reading a room before he had finished crossing it, his eyes flicking once, briefly, over Daniel's boots, his jeans, the faint callus visible on his right hand. "Looking for something specific," Preston said. Not quite a question, the kind of sentence built to invite a modest answer he could immediately outmaneuver. Daniel nodded. "A bedroom set for my daughter. Bed frame, maybe a small dresser. I've got a budget I need to stay inside of." "Of course," Preston said, already turning toward the far side of the showroom. Toward a curated arrangement of furniture with price tags discreetly turned inward, the international symbol for asterisk. If you have to ask, you can't afford it asterisk. "Let's see what we can find you." What followed was not cruelty dramatic enough to be reported to a manager. It was smaller than that and somehow sharper for it. It was the way Preston's voice softened when he mentioned a price, as though breaking difficult news to a child. It was the way he steered Daniel past the clearance section without acknowledging it existed, toward a canopy bed with hand-carved detailing that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. It was the small laugh, barely audible, that escaped when Daniel asked whether the store offered payment plans. "We do," Preston said, recovering quickly, professionally. "Though I should mention most of our clientele prefers to purchase outright." He let the sentence sit there, doing its quiet work. Daniel felt the heat rise in the back of his neck, the particular embarrassment of a man who had worked 12-hour days for 15 years and still found himself measured, in rooms like this one, by the fabric of his jacket rather than the strength of his hands. He said nothing. He rarely did, in moments like this. He had learned long ago that dignity was not something you defended loudly. It was something you carried quietly and let speak for itself over time. "I have $800, Daniel said evenly. "I'd like to see what fits inside that." Preston's smile thinned, the professional mask slipping just enough to reveal something colder beneath it. "Sir, with respect, this location caters to a certain market. There's a discount furniture outlet 2 exits down the highway that might better suit your budget." The words landed in the open showroom with an unfortunate clarity, loud enough that a woman browsing nearby lamps turned her head. Loud enough that a young sales associate folding throw pillows near the register paused mid-fold. Daniel absorbed it the way he absorbed most things, with a stillness that could easily be mistaken for defeat, but was in fact something closer to calculation. He did not raise his voice, he did not demand an apology. He simply looked at Preston for a moment longer than was comfortable. The kind of look that made certain men reconsider their footing without understanding exactly why. And then he turned and walked out of the store, past the gleaming directory sign in the shopping center's central corridor, past the fountain that had been installed 2 years earlier at his own direction, past the security office where a guard named Walt lifted 2 fingers in casual greeting the way he always did. "Evening, Mr. Reyes," Walt said. "Evening, Walt," Daniel replied and kept walking. 3 weeks earlier, none of this would have seemed remarkable at all, because 3 weeks earlier, Daniel Reyes had simply been a man trying to figure out how to raise a 9-year-old alone while working himself into the ground, one modest paycheck at a time. His wife, Elena, had passed 2 years prior, quickly and unfairly, the kind of loss that reorganizes a person's entire understanding of what matters. In the aftermath, Daniel had quietly stepped back from the day-to-day operation of Reyes Properties, the commercial real estate holding company his own father had built from a single strip mall into a portfolio that now included, among other things, the very shopping center Preston Cole worked inside of. He installed a competent management team, signed what needed signing from a distance, and spent the better part of 2 years doing something that mattered more to him in that season of his life. Showing up, packing lunches, sitting through spelling tests, being simply present for his daughter in a way his own frequently absent father never had been for him. He kept his ownership quiet, not out of shame, but out of something closer to self-protection. He had learned early, back when his father was alive and the Reyes name still opened certain doors too easily, that people behaved differently around wealth. They performed, they flattered. So Daniel dressed the way he had always dressed, drove the same 12-year-old truck he'd bought used before Mia was born, and worked odd construction shifts for a friend's company not because he needed the money, but because the work was honest, and honest work had always steadied him. Nobody at Cole Home and Interiors knew the man Preston Cole had just insulted owned the building the store operated inside of, along with 40% of the shopping center's total retail space, and held a controlling interest in the holding company that had renewed the store's lease 18 months earlier on more generous terms than the market technically required because the previous owner of the business, Preston's uncle, had been a long-time and well-liked tenant. Daniel had not planned to reveal any of that. He rarely did. His approach to conflict had always mirrored the approach his mother, a quiet and formidable woman, had taught him as a boy. Observe first, act only when you understand the full shape of the situation, and never let anger choose your next move for you. So instead of storming back into the showroom, instead of demanding to see a manager and making a scene that would satisfy the moment but accomplish nothing lasting, Daniel simply walked to his truck, sat behind the wheel for a moment in the settling evening light, and made a note in his phone. * Cole Home and Interiors. Check recent customer complaint history. Then he drove home, picked up dinner along the way, and spent the evening helping Mia with a science project about the water cycle. The humiliation of the showroom folding itself neatly into the back of his mind, filed away rather than forgotten. The shopping center itself, Lakeshore Commons, sat at the edge of a growing suburb, anchored by a grocery store on one end and a movie theater on the other, with roughly 40 small retail spaces filling the corridor between them. It had been, for the better part of a decade, a quietly profitable and well-regarded property. The kind of place local families genuinely liked visiting, in no small part because Daniel's father had insisted, decades earlier, on treating tenants like partners rather than line items. Cole Home and Interiors had been a tenant for 6 years, first under the ownership of Preston's uncle, Harold Cole, a soft-spoken man who had built the business on genuine craftsmanship and fair pricing, and more recently under Preston himself, who had taken over daily operations 18 months earlier when Harold's health began declining. The transition had not gone unnoticed. Complaints, once rare, had begun trickling in. A pricing dispute here, a miscommunication about a delivery there. Nothing dramatic enough to warrant intervention, but enough to form a pattern if anyone had been paying close attention. Daniel had not been paying attention, not really, not until the evening a salesman looked at his boots and decided he knew everything he needed to know about the man standing in front of him. The following Monday, Daniel returned to Lakeshore Commons, though not to the furniture store. He walked instead into the modest management office tucked behind the dry cleaner, where his property manager, a sharp and unflappable woman named Renata Vance, greeted him with the easy familiarity of someone who had worked alongside him for 6 years and had long ago stopped being surprised by his habit of dressing like one of the maintenance crew. "Didn't expect you in today," Renata said, closing her laptop halfway, a habit Daniel had noticed years ago and never mentioned, a small courtesy she extended to every visitor regardless of rank. "Pull the file on Cole Home and Interiors," Daniel said. "Recent complaints, payment history, staff turnover. Anything that's crossed your desk in the last year." Renata's eyebrows lifted slightly, curiosity flickering across her face before professionalism smoothed it away. "Everything all right?" "Just want the full picture," Daniel said, which was true though not the complete truth. He did not mention the showroom, the laugh, the suggestion that a discount outlet 2 exits down the highway might better suit a man in construction boots. Some things he preferred to verify quietly before giving them weight. Over the following days, a picture assembled itself with the kind of clarity that made Daniel's stomach tighten. 3 formal complaints in the past year, each dismissed at the time as isolated incidents. A pattern of customers reporting they had been steered away from budget-friendly items, occasionally with comments about their appearance or apparent income. A part-time employee, a young woman named Cassie Nolan, who had quietly resigned 2 months earlier, and whose exit interview notes, when Renata finally located them, included a single unelaborated line, *uncomfortable with how certain customers were treated, *. Daniel read that line twice. He did not act immediately. He had learned, through years of watching his father navigate difficult decisions, that acting on incomplete information was its own kind of recklessness. So instead of confronting Preston directly, Daniel asked Renata to quietly reach out to Cassie Nolan. The conversation, when it happened 3 days later, took place in a coffee shop 2 blocks from Lakeshore Commons. Daniel sitting across from a 23-year-old woman, who seemed surprised anyone had bothered to ask. "I didn't think anyone would care," Cassie admitted, turning a paper cup slowly between her hands. "Preston's good with customers who look like they belong there. Nice car, nice clothes, he's all charm. But if someone comes in looking like they might not spend much, he changes, talks down to them. Tells people the store wasn't really designed for their budget. Even when we had affordable pieces in the back room, he never bothered to show them." "Did you report this?" Daniel asked, though he already suspected the answer. "I mentioned it once," Cassie said. "Nothing happened. Preston's numbers are good. He hits his targets. I guess that's what mattered." Daniel absorbed this without visible reaction, though something inside him had settled into a familiar and quiet resolve, the same steadiness that had carried him through the worst year of his life without ever once raising his voice at a nurse, a doctor, or a well-meaning stranger who offered the wrong kind of comfort at the wrong moment. He thanked Cassie for her time, insisted on covering her coffee despite her protests, and left with a folder of names, dates, and a growing understanding of a pattern that had been allowed to continue simply because nobody with sufficient authority had ever bothered to look closely enough. 2 weeks passed. Daniel returned to Cole Home and Interiors exactly once during that stretch, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Dressed the same way he always dressed, in the same faded jeans and work boots that had triggered Preston's dismissiveness in the first place. He did not approach the salesman. He walked the floor slowly, noting the layout, the pricing, the way affordable pieces were tucked toward the back, half obscured behind decorative room dividers, as though the store were quietly ashamed of its own inventory. Preston noticed him near the register and offered a thin, practiced smile of recognition. "Back again," he said. "Find that outlet, all right?" "I did," Daniel said simply, and left it there, watching something flicker across Preston's face. Not quite guilt. More the reflexive discomfort of a man briefly wondering if he'd misjudged a situation, before deciding, visibly, that he had not. That single exchange told Daniel everything he needed to know about whether Preston Cole had learned anything from the encounter 3 weeks earlier. He hadn't. If anything, the memory of it seemed to amuse him. Daniel drove home that evening and, for the first time since Elena's passing, opened his laptop and pulled up the full holding company dashboard he had not touched in months. The quarterly performance reports, the tenant compliance records, the lease renewal schedule that showed Cole Home and Interior's current agreement expiring in 4 months. He did not act rashly. He never did. Instead, he asked Renata to schedule a standard, unremarkable tenant review meeting, the kind conducted periodically with every business in the shopping center, framed entirely as routine due diligence ahead of lease renewal season. Nothing about the invitation would have suggested anything unusual to Preston Cole, who received it the following Monday with the mild irritation of a man being asked to fill out paperwork he considered beneath him. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning in the small conference room behind the management office. The kind of unremarkable space with a scuffed table and a whiteboard nobody ever erased properly. Preston arrived 7 minutes late, blazer perfectly pressed. The confident ease of a man who had never once considered that a routine meeting might be anything other than routine. He stopped short in the doorway when he saw who was seated at the table beside Renata Vance. Daniel Reyes sat with the same calm posture he carried everywhere, a folder closed in front of him, dressed, this time, not in work boots and faded jeans, but in a simple gray suit that fit him the way clothing fits a man who has never needed it to prove anything. Preston's eyes moved between Daniel's face and the folder and back again. Some internal calculation visibly working itself out behind his expression, the specific dawning horror of a man realizing, several beats too late, that a piece of information he should have had weeks ago had been withheld from him by his own assumptions. "Mr. Cole," Renata said evenly, gesturing to the empty chair. "Thank you for coming. I believe you've already met Mr. Reyes." Preston sat slowly, the color draining from his face by careful, visible degrees. Ah yes, we've met. Mr. Reyes is the majority owner of Lakeshore Commons, Renata continued, her tone entirely professional, betraying nothing. He asked to sit impersonally on this particular review. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it stretched with the peculiar density of a moment in which an entire relationship rearranges itself. Preston's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Whatever explanation he might have constructed for his own behavior, whatever version of the story he had told himself in which the man in work boots had simply been an unimportant customer he was entitled to dismiss, collapsed under the weight of the folder sitting closed on the table. I want to be clear, Daniel said, his voice steady, unhurried, carrying none of the theatrical satisfaction a lesser man might have allowed himself in this moment. This isn't personal. I've been treated worse by better people, and I've learned not to let my own ego decide what deserves attention. He opened the folder. But it turns out you've been rude, dismissive, or outright discriminatory toward a documented number of customers over the past 18 months, based on nothing more than what they were wearing or what car they drove into this parking lot. 3 formal complaints on file. An exit interview from a former employee who quit specifically because of how she watched you treat people. Receipts showing that customers who looked like they had money spent, on average, 40% more per visit than customers who didn't. That's not a personality quirk. That's a business strategy, and one that happens to violate the fair business practice standards this shopping center requires every tenant to uphold as a condition of their lease. Preston's jaw tightened, the only visible sign that the conversation had not unfolded the way he had expected it to when he woke up that morning. Mr. Reyes, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I run a successful business. My numbers. Your numbers are good, Daniel interrupted. Not unkindly, simply factually. I've seen them. You're a talented salesman when you decide someone's worth selling to. That's actually the problem, Preston. You build a business model that depends on deciding, within seconds, who deserves your effort and who doesn't, and you've been wrong more often than you seem to realize because the man you told to try a discount outlet 2 exits down the highway happens to own this shopping center, your storefront, and 40% of the retail space between here and the movie theater. Preston said nothing. There was nothing, in that moment, to say. Your uncle built this business on the idea that everyone walking through that door deserved to be treated with respect, regardless of what they could afford that particular day. Daniel continued. I remember him. He used to comp delivery fees for young families buying their first bed frame. That's the tenant we signed a favorable lease renewal for 18 months ago. That's not the business you're currently running. What happens now? Preston said finally, the bravado gone from his voice, replaced by something smaller, more uncertain. Daniel closed the folder. That depends on you. Your lease is up for renewal in 4 months. Normally that would be a formality. Given what's in this file, it isn't anymore. I'm not interested in destroying your livelihood, Preston. I'm interested in whether you're capable of running this store the way your uncle did, or whether you're going to keep making the mistake you made with me, over and over, with people who don't happen to own the building. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table, a formal notice outlining a 90-day probationary review period. Mandatory customer service retraining conducted by an outside firm the holding company would arrange and cover, and a requirement that all pricing and product presentation be reorganized to ensure every customer, regardless of appearance, received equal access to the store's full inventory. Fail to meet these conditions, Daniel said, and the lease renewal will not go forward. That's not a threat. It's a standard we hold every tenant in this shopping center to. You was simply never tested against it before, because nobody caught what you were doing until I happened to be standing in your showroom, in the wrong pair of boots. Preston stared at the paper for a long moment before finally picking it up, his hands, Daniel noticed, trembling almost imperceptibly, the small physical admission of a man whose entire sense of control had quietly, irreversibly shifted. I'll sign it, Preston said quietly. I'd encourage you to actually mean it, Daniel replied, standing. Not because I'm watching. Because it's the right way to run a business and it's the way your uncle taught you to, whether or not you were paying attention at the time. The weeks that followed unfolded with less drama than the meeting itself, though not without consequence. Preston completed the mandated retraining, grudgingly at first, and then, with what appeared to be genuine reflection somewhere around the 3rd week. The showroom's layout changed, affordable pieces brought forward rather than hidden, pricing displayed openly rather than turned discreetly inward. Cassie Nolan returned 3 weeks later, this time not as a part-time floor associate, but as assistant manager, a position Preston himself, somewhat to Daniel's surprise, had proposed after realizing he needed someone in the room who would tell him the truth rather than simply agree with him. Daniel did not involve himself further than necessary. He had learned over the years that real change rarely came from someone standing over another person's shoulder indefinitely. It came from consequences applied fairly, followed by the space to actually change. He checked in with Renata periodically, reviewed the quarterly compliance reports when they came due, and otherwise returned to the rhythm of his life, the school pickups, the science projects, the quiet evenings with Mia that mattered infinitely more to him than any boardroom ever had. It was nearly 5 months later, on a Saturday afternoon, that Daniel found himself once again inside Cole Home and Interiors. This time with Mia at his side, her hand wrapped around his as she wandered ahead toward a display of brightly colored bookshelves near the store's newly reorganized entrance. Preston spotted them from across the showroom and approached. More carefully this time, without the practiced glide of a man confident, he already understood everything about the people in front of him. "Mr. Reyes," he said. "Good to see you." "Daniel's fine," Daniel replied, and meant it, in the way a man means something when the anger behind a grievance has fully burned itself out. "I've thought a lot about that day," Preston said, searching for words that felt honest rather than performative. "About how many other people I probably said something similar to, without ever thinking twice about it." He glanced toward Mia, cross-legged on the floor beside a small reading nook built into the display. "My uncle used to tell me anyone who walks through that door is somebody's whole world to somebody. I didn't understand what he meant until recently." "He was right," Daniel said simply. Mia called out, holding up a small wooden bookshelf shaped like a castle turret, her face lit with uncomplicated delight. "Dad, can we get this one?" "It's not even that expensive." Preston knelt to check the tag without the old performance, without the reflexive calculation of what kind of customer deserved his attention. "It's actually one of our most popular pieces," he said to her, genuinely, "and it's on sale this week." Daniel bought the bookshelf, along with the bed frame Mia had originally wanted 5 months earlier, paying in full, at a fair price, in a store that finally treated every customer the way his father had always insisted every tenant in Lakeshore Commons ought to treat the people who kept their businesses alive. As they walked back through the corridor, past the fountain, past Walt at the security desk, who lifted 2 fingers in greeting as he always did, Mia looked up at her father with the curiosity of a child sensing a story she hadn't been told. "Do you know that man?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment, watching the late afternoon light fall across the corridor his father had built decades earlier. "I used to," he said. "I think he's becoming someone better now." Mia seemed satisfied with that, and skipped ahead toward the truck, the small wooden castle clutched against her chest, while Daniel walked behind her at an unhurried pace, carrying nothing more than the quiet satisfaction of a man who had never needed anyone to know what he owned, only what he stood for. If this story touched something and you hit that like button, it helps this channel grow. Subscribe if you haven't, because we share stories like this every day.